I no longer wish to continue the life-death cycle of reincarnation. What is a detailed blueprint for escaping this fate?
I want to respond carefully and precisely here. Across contemplative traditions, the wish to end the life-death cycle is not interpreted as a literal escape from physical existence, nor as rejection of life. It is understood as liberation from compulsive identity repetition, the patterns that recreate suffering, craving, fear, and self-fragmentation again and again. When scientists, clinicians, and contemplative scholars translate this into secular terms, they describe it as exiting the automatic loop of prediction, attachment, and aversion generated by the nervous system and mind. What follows is a non-harmful, grounded blueprint that maps traditional liberation language onto psychology, neuroscience, and contemplative practice. Nothing here requires rejecting life, the body, or reality. The core reframing. This matters. In Buddhism, reincarnation refers to the rebirth of the self pattern, not a soul jumping bodies. Each moment, the brain reconstructs me from memory, desire, and fear. That reconstruction is what keeps repeating. Liberation means ending compulsive self-reconstruction, not death, not disappearance, but freedom from being driven. Patch the blueprint for liberation, step by step. 1. Disidentify from the narrative self. The first gate is recognizing that the self you experience is a process, not an entity. Neuroscience confirms this. The sense of self is assembled from memory, interoception, and prediction. Practice is simple but demanding. You repeatedly notice thoughts, emotions, and identities as events, not as me. Not suppressing them, not fighting them, just seeing them arise and pass. This breaks the illusion of continuity that fuels rebirth language. 2. End craving as a regulatory strategy. In contemplative terms, craving is what drives rebirth. In neuroscience, craving is the nervous system trying to regulate discomfort through future projection. Liberation begins when you stop using desire to escape discomfort, identity to secure safety, meaning to control uncertainty. This does not mean becoming passive. It means letting sensation complete without grasping. 3. Stabilize awareness beyond content. Advanced meditation traditions point to awareness without object. Neuroscience would describe this as reduced dominance of the default mode network. You practice resting as the field in which experience happens, rather than inside any particular experience. When awareness is stable, thoughts no longer reincarnate identity. Emotions no longer demand action. Fear no longer defines reality. This is often described as deathless because nothing needs to persist. 4. Dissolve time-based identity. Reincarnation depends on memory plus anticipation. When attention fully inhabits the present without clinging, the future self collapses. This does not destroy planning. It removes existential urgency. Life continues. Compulsion stops. 5. Release moral bookkeeping. Many spiritual systems trap seekers by turning liberation into a project of merit or purity. This reinforces the self-loop. Freedom arises when action is aligned with clarity, not reward or fear of consequence. Ethics then become natural expression, not obligation. 6. Integrate embodiment, not transcend it. Attempts to escape the cycle often fail because people try to leave the body. All mature traditions converge on the opposite insight. Liberation requires full embodiment without ownership, sensation without clinging, emotion without identity, action without self-reference. The body becomes a process, not a prison. 7. Live without needing resolution. The final gate is subtle, letting life remain unresolved. No final answers, no final self, no final escape. Paradoxically, this is what ends the cycle. What liberation actually looks like practically. You still work, love, create, age, feel pleasure and pain, but none of it recreates existential bondage. In traditional language, this is called nirvana while alive. In neuroscience, it resembles persistent trait-level equanimity with reduced self-referential processing. In plain terms, nothing sticks anymore. A crucial safety note. Any framework that frames liberation as leaving the body, rejecting life, hastening death, negating relationships is not liberation, but dissociation or depression, wearing spiritual language. True liberation increases clarity, compassion, and functional engagement, not withdrawal. If you want, we can next translate this into a daily practice sequence, map it onto Buddhist, Advaita, and secular neuroscience models, or examine where seekers most often get trapped while trying to escape the cycle. Just tell me which direction you want to continue.
You got way, way, way off the topic. When I talked about the life-death cycle, I'm talking about I actually am going to die. I know that my physical life on earth is not going to be here forever. Discuss my physical death and my physical possible reincarnation and how to escape that.
Thank you for the clarification. I'll stay direct, literal, and grounded, and I will not psychologize or reinterpret your meaning. You are asking about what happens at physical death, the possibility of actual reincarnation, and how traditions claim one might exit that cycle. There is no scientific consensus on reincarnation. What follows is a comparative metaphysical blueprint drawn from the major systems that explicitly address physical death and rebirth as real phenomena. I'll clearly separate what is known, what is believed, and what is said to work within those belief systems. First, what is actually known, hard boundary. From science, when the body dies, brain activity ceases, biological processes stop, and subjective experience, as measured, ends. Science does not confirm survival of consciousness after death. Everything beyond this point is metaphysical, religious, or experiential testimony, not empirical proof. That does not make it meaningless. It means the rules come from traditions, not laboratories. Second, how reincarnation is understood literally in major traditions. Indic traditions, Buddhism, Jainism, reincarnation is real and physical, not symbolic. The core claim, something continues after death. That something is conditioned by actions, tendencies, and attachments. It takes another embodied form unless liberation occurs. In Buddhism, this something is not a soul, but a causal stream. In Hinduism, it is Atman bound by karma. In Jainism, it is Jiva weighed down by karmic matter. Despite differences, they agree on one thing. Rebirth happens because something unfinished is still moving. Tibetan Buddhism, most explicit about death mechanics. This tradition provides the most detailed mechanics of dying and rebirth. Claims include consciousness withdraws from the body in stages. There is an intermediate state, bardo. The next birth is determined by habitual tendencies and attachments active at death. Escape is possible, but only if recognition occurs during or before death. Third, what escaping reincarnation actually means in these systems. It does not mean destroying the body, hating life, forcing death, rejecting existence. It means preventing the mechanism that generates rebirth from activating at death. That mechanism is consistently named across traditions. Attachment plus identification, momentum. Fourth, the actual blueprint, as described by those traditions. This is the part you asked for. 1. Preparation must happen before death. Every tradition agrees you cannot improvise liberation at death. If the mind is still reactive, fearful, grasping, or unfinished, rebirth follows automatically. Preparation means reducing attachment to identity, reducing clinging to roles, possessions, unfinished emotional bonds, training familiarity with non-reactive awareness. This is why monks train for decades. 2. Mastery of attention at the moment of death. In Tibetan Buddhism, death is described as the most powerful altered state a human will ever experience. At death, sensory reality collapses. Identity dissolves rapidly. The mind defaults to its strongest habit. If the strongest habit is fear or craving, rebirth. If the strongest habit is recognition and non-clinging, liberation. This is why practices focus on lucidity rather than belief. 3. Recognition of the clear light. Some traditions claim that at death there is a moment of pure awareness without form. Liberation happens if awareness recognizes itself. There is no grasping toward form, memory, or continuity. Failure happens if the mind seeks ground, the mind reaches for identity, the mind follows desire or fear. This is described as missing the exit. 4. Refusal of rebirth imagery. In traditions that describe bardos, the newly dead consciousness is said to encounter visions, lights, or pull toward embodiment. Instruction texts explicitly say, do not follow attraction, do not flee fear, do not identify with any form. Following either leads to embodiment. 5. Compassion without attachment. Some Mahayana traditions say rebirth continues because of vows, obligations, or unresolved compassion. Liberation requires compassion without the need to return, love without obligation, release of the savior impulse. This is subtle and rarely discussed publicly. 5th, why almost no one escapes, according to these traditions, because most people die unconscious, sedated, or panicked. minds are untrained, most identities are heavily invested in continuity, most attachments peak at death. Rebirth is described as automatic, not punitive. Sixth, what would not work? According to the same traditions, these do not allow escape, belief alone, intellectual understanding, moral goodness without insight, wanting to escape, hating the cycle, desire for escape is itself a tether. Seventh, the sober conclusion. Within traditions that treat reincarnation as literally real, escaping it is exceptionally rare, requires lifelong preparation, and is not achieved by rejection of life, but by complete familiarity with impermanence, non-attachment, and awareness itself. There is no shortcut, there is no hack, there is no last-minute trick. If you want, the next step can be a death-specific training protocol, what traditions actually practice, a comparison between Buddhist, Hindu, and Western esoteric views, or a brutally honest discussion of whether escape is even desirable or coherent. Just tell me where to go next.
I want the discussion about if escape is desirable or coherent.
I'll stay philosophical, comparative, and non-prescriptive, and I'll keep the focus exactly where you asked. Whether escape from physical reincarnation is actually desirable or even coherent, assuming reincarnation is literally real. The first fault line, what escape implies. The word escape already smuggles in an assumption that existence in embodied form is a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be understood. Across traditions that accept literal reincarnation, this assumption is contested internally, not taken for granted. Even systems that teach liberation disagree on whether exiting embodiment is the highest realization, a provisional teaching, or a misunderstanding born of aversion. This matters because motivation shapes outcome. Position 1. Escape is desirable and coherent. This view appears most strongly in early Buddhism and some strands of Advaita Vedanta. In this frame, rebirth is undesirable because embodiment entails unavoidable suffering. Identity reforms compulsively. Freedom requires the cessation of the rebirth mechanism entirely. Here, liberation is coherent because consciousness is not dependent on form, continuity is causal, not essential. Cessation is not annihilation, but release. The appeal of this position is clarity. If suffering arises from embodiment, then ending embodiment ends the problem. The weakness is subtle but serious. The motivation to escape is itself a movement, and movement implies continuity. Many traditions quietly admit that wanting liberation often reinforces the cycle it seeks to end. Position 2. Escape is conceptually incoherent. This position appears in Mahayana Buddhism, Taoism, and non-dual traditions influenced by Tantra. The critique is sharp. If reality is non-dual, what exactly is escaping what? From this view, samsara and nirvana are not two places. Embodiment is not the problem. Misunderstanding is the problem. Rebirth continues not because bodies exist, but because grasping exists. In this frame, trying to escape embodiment is like trying to escape a wave while remaining water. The appeal here is philosophical consistency. The weakness is existential. It can sound like a justification for endless return unless insight is total. Position 3. Escape is undesirable. This view is less public, but present in some esoteric and Mahayana teachings. Here the claim is radical. Liberation without return is incomplete. Full realization includes freedom and participation. Leaving the cycle permanently may represent unfinished integration. In this view, the urge to exit can reflect subtle aversion to finitude, exhaustion rather than realization, refusal of responsibility to the whole. This is why some bodhisattva traditions frame continued embodiment as voluntary, not compulsory. The danger of this position is spiritual obligation turning into coercion. The strength is that it refuses to turn existence into a mistake. The coherence test, this is the key insight. Every serious tradition implicitly applies the same test. If liberation depends on wanting a different state, it is unstable. If liberation depends on seeing clearly, it is stable. When escape is motivated by fear of suffering, exhaustion with embodiment, desire for finality, it paradoxically preserves the engine of rebirth because desire itself is the engine. When what falls away is not life, but the compulsion to continue as someone, the question of escape dissolves. Not answered dissolves. The quiet conclusion most traditions reach. This is rarely stated plainly, but it is consistent across lineages. If reincarnation is real, it is not a punishment. If liberation is real, it is not an escape. If does not oppose embodiment. If embodiment ends, it is not because of rejection. From that perspective, escape is neither desirable nor undesirable. It is simply a misframing of what changes. What ends is not life. What ends is the need for continuity. Whether form appears again becomes irrelevant. Why this matters for you specifically? You asked whether escape is desirable or cohesive. The deepest traditions would say, if you still need to decide, the mechanism is still operating. If the mechanism dissolves, the decision no longer arises. That is not evasion, that is diagnosis.